Dear colleagues, experts of nature-based solutions, I guess it's time to start our next session, and we'll be talking about social and economic values of nature-based solutions and restoration. My name is Liisa Tyrväinen. I work as a professor in Natural Resources Institute Finland in Helsinki, and Himanshu Mishra is with me in the back, taking care of the notes and following the online discussion. And we both have worked with the Clearing House project. And our session is divided in two parts. First, we will have 4 quite short presentations to give you a little bit more insight what kind of topics have been researched in this thematic area in Clearing House and Clearing House and REGREEN projects. And after that, we will have a panel discussion, and I invite then audience to participate, and there might not be time for questions directly after the presentations, but then we welcome you to ask questions and contribute to the discussion. And yes, the panelists will be the speakers. So I will invite, I have a pleasure to invite the first speaker, Dr. Joe Garrett, who is a research fellow working at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health in Exeter, University of Exeter in the UK. And Joe describes his domain. She's a human geographer utilizing quantitative and GIS approaches in her work. You're very welcome, Joe.
Hi everyone, thank you Lisa. Yeah, and today I'm talking about valuing the reduced risk from mortality by heat from public green spaces in Paris. So in the future, we're expecting heat waves that happen more often, that last longer, and with higher maximum temperatures. And this is expected to correspond to an increase in heat-related illnesses and mortality. This will be exacerbated by increased urbanization due to the urban heat island effect and an aging population who are more vulnerable to heat-related morbidity and mortality. However, as we know, parks and green spaces are cooler than their surrounding areas, and this cooling extends beyond their boundaries to the nearby areas. And this represents a potential nature-based solution for adapting to and mitigating increased urban heat. So we wanted to explore this effect and understand the current health benefits from green spaces in terms of their reduced risk to mortality, and calculate the associated economic value. And our case study site was Paris. France was particularly affected during the 2003 European heat wave, with nearly 15,000 excess deaths estimated, of which 2,000 were in Paris. Our REGREEN colleague, Neil Bird from Austria, he provided high spatial resolution temperature maps for Paris for 2019, and he calculated average daily air temperature in squares of 30 by 30 meters for Paris. And we could then overlay this with a data set of public green spaces in Paris so that we could calculate their cooling effect. So we started with a data set of nearly 2,000 green spaces, and these were at least 1,000 meters squared for our analysis purposes. We then took a subset of these that were also at least 100 meters from other green spaces or water bodies. From these then, we could then calculate the cooling distance. So that's the distance beyond which we could no longer detect cooling from our green spaces. So this figure shows the example from one green space. So on the x-axis, we have the distance from the boundary of the green space from 0 meters to nearly 600 meters. And on the y-axis, we have the average temperature within rings of 30 meters apart going away from the green space. So as you go away from the green space until about 200 meters, you can see that the temperature increases. Or thinking about this another way, moving towards the green space from that distance, the temperature cools. Beyond 200 meters, the temperature cools again a little bit. That's possibly due to other green spaces nearby. So we use this peak to identify the maximum cooling distance. And that's a distance, again, beyond which we can no longer detect cooling effect from our green space. So we then calculate the temperature difference between the green space boundary and this maximum cooling distance. We did this for a subset of 3 days with a range of temperatures during a heat wave in July 2019. We then carried out statistical modelling, exploring the effect of the green space size and the vegetation greenness on the cooling effects described. So this figure shows the results of that statistical modelling then, with on the x-axis we have the green space area from 1,000 meters squared, that's our minimum, to 1 million meters squared. And on the y-axis we have the temperature difference between the green space boundary and our maximum cooling distance. And that's from 0 degrees to nearly 2 degrees. Each point then represents a single green space on each of the days that we analysed. And the line represents the relationship between size and our temperature difference. So as the green spaces increased in size, then we can see that their effect on the temperature also increased. And the median temperature difference was 0.2 degrees, and the maximum was nearly 2 degrees. So we could then take these relationships that predict the cooling effect by size and greenness, and then use these to predict the cooling effect for all public green spaces larger than 1,000 meters squared for all hot days in Paris in 2019. And to carry out the valuation then, we need to know how many people are affected, so how many people live within the maximum cooling distances for each green space, and what temperature are they exposed to, and the corresponding relative risk of mortality. So this plot shows the temperature from -5 degrees to 30 degrees, and on the y-axis, the associated relative risk of mortality. And this was taken from a paper published by Pascal et al. In 2018, where they calculated the relative risk of mortality associated with temperatures for a range of cities in France. So you can see on the left-hand side of the plot, there's a slight increase in relative risk associated with cooler temperatures. But on the right-hand side, as the temperature increases beyond around 21 degrees, then there's a rapid increase in the relative risk of mortality, up until around 2.5 times more likely at 30 degrees. So to calculate the life saved, we then compare the relative risk of mortality at our observed cooled temperatures, and we compare that with temperatures as if there was no green space there, as if there was no green space cooling, to calculate the life saved, and then we value those using the value of a statistical life. So this presents the results. So for each green space presented, we have the total value for all hot days in Paris in 2019, where yellow is the maximum value in our categorization of at least 50,000 euros. Some spaces had no value. That could be because either they had no people living within their maximum cooling distance, or because we did not detect a cooling effect. So in general, as the green spaces increased in size, as we've discussed, they cooled a large area, had a greater effect on temperature, and associated relative risk on mortality. And this means that they also had an increased value. However, smaller spaces could have a higher value per unit area, and this tended to be highest for spaces in the range 5,000 to 10,000 meters squared. So to sum up, we estimated that a total of 21.5 people were saved in Paris in 2019 due to the public green spaces, and 50% of the population within the 4 central departments of Paris were found to be living within the maximum cooling distances of green spaces and therefore benefiting from their cooling effect. So to sum up, larger spaces cooled a greater area, had a greater effect on mortality and therefore had a higher value. However, smaller spaces could have a higher value per unit area. So thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Joe, of sharing this work you've done in Paris. And this kind of economic values of the benefits are very much called for, and it's great to see that this kind of work is ongoing. But also we saw that it's quite complicated to get all the parameters and the background information ready for this kind of evaluation. But Joe has been working with the REGREEN project, and we have another, next speaker is also from REGREEN project, James Fulham from the same institute, same university. And James says he's worked across a range of health services, research positions, and focusing on developing these complex interventions. So the next few minutes are yours, James. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a photo elicitation project that our team conducted as part of REGREEN, which looked at residents' experiences and perceptions of street trees in a mental health context. And just so you understand what photo elicitation is, a lot of you will be familiar with traditional focus groups. And really, it's just a kind of simple idea of inserting photographs and using them to kind of guide or found the conversations in the focus groups. And we use them because photos can elicit a different type of information than just having these purely verbal or textual exchanges. You know, that visual activates different parts of the brain and can really help to bring out some different emotions and different feelings and different memories. And the method we used was, we did all of these focus groups online. We originally planned to do them in person and to use kind of slightly different recruitment and talk to different groups, but COVID got in the way of that, so we switched to an online format. We did use simultaneous translation, which you'll be familiar with from using your headsets for the last couple of days, so people were able to speak and hear in their native languages. So we did 2 focus groups in each of the European ULLs, 6 in total, and we have about 10 hours of data and 10 hours of conversation. So I'm only going to kind of give you a quick snapshot of the findings today. But we were also lucky enough to be able to include some urban planners and people involved in management of green spaces in the Paris and Art House labs, which added a really interesting dynamic to the conversations we had there. So just to kind of, again, on the method, just so you really understand what we're doing, we gathered photos from our partners in the ULLs from various places around their cities, and we put these up on the screen and share them as a collage or single photos, and really kind of start our conversations by focusing specifically on the photographs and allowing the discussions to evolve from there. So just to give you a few ideas of the kind of themes that came up, this one, seasons and sense of place. This is, you know, consistent with a lot of the literature out there on why people value street trees. And you know, we did expect this, but it's always nice when it's kind of brought up, especially unprompted. These issues around kind of sense of place, and particularly with the seasonality and noticing the seasons, you can quite strongly link that to nature connection and these various pathways around how nature might impact mental health and well-being. Another really interesting theme was around security and sense of safety, and I think this is interesting because it kind of challenges this idea that's sometimes promoted that all trees are good all of the time, and it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more complex than that. And you know, our participants were quite well aware of that, and were able to make comments about how there are often, it's not just the leafy green suburbs where middle-class wealthy people live where there's street trees. There's street trees in all kinds of places, and it's much more to do with how they're maintained, and you know, how they're planned rather than just their presence. The second quote there, it's quite an extreme example. You know, the issues around violence against women and how safe spaces are. but it was discussed quite earnestly, and I think the kind of points that raised about who are the end users. Obviously, everybody is the end users of an NBS like street trees, but it helps you to start to think about who are the groups and the kind of times they're using these spaces and how they're using these spaces. So another theme that was raised quite strongly was this idea of us versus them and the sense of agency as experienced by residents and citizens. And this came up really strongly. Some of our UK colleagues here today will know all about what's happened in Sheffield in the last number of years, where there was a complete breakdown in trust between the residents and the council over their street tree removal programme. It was a absolutely fantastic example of how not to do things. And it wasn't just the breakdown in trust between the residents and the council, but there was also a lot of resident versus resident tension that was created out of this. And we're it's really, I think, relevant contemporaneously, as we're seeing a lot more protests around the world about street tree removal. But on the flip side, we also have, kind of growing anti-green and anti-environmental justice agendas, and having these conversations is really helpful to kind of try and understand the roots of these and what causes this growing distrust or this this loss of sense of agency by citizens in cities. So just some kind of quite quick and broad reflections from the project. Some of the kind of more interesting single points rather than themes. One of them was that urban residents are not naive to the trade-offs and resource constraints of living in these urban settings. It was said yesterday that 90% of people love trees, and then there's 10% who will complain about them. And I think that's true to a large degree, but actually, again, it's much more nuanced than that. While people largely do enjoy having street trees in their neighborhoods and their vicinities and experiencing them, they also have other priorities, and if it's a choice between having clean streets or potentially having somewhere to park your car, having street trees starts to drop down the list fairly quickly. Mismanaged trees and removal and planting programs can have this massive potential to create or damage trust and create tension. That goes back to that previous slide, and that's again, as I said, it's really important at the moment, and we're seeing more and more of that in the UK on both sides, as I mentioned, and that's something we'd really like to drill down more into, because it does seem to have this massive impact on people's well-being, and indeed the well-being and mental health of the city authorities and councils themselves. And finally, this point that came across very clearly in the conversations is that residents value mature stock much more so than new trees. And we as researchers couch it in a very technical language, but the participants that we spoke to, they spoke about all of these ecosystem services, maybe not using this language, but we're fully aware of the kind of exponentially greater effect and impact of having mature trees. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for these interesting points. I guess it's a rather common phenomenon that citizens are fighting for the trees and trying to save the trees, and the big trees are really valuable. And of course, it's very logical because they have higher biodiversity values, aesthetic values. All the functions are mature with these trees. So great, let's talk more about your findings a little bit later on. Then we have a next speaker, Sebastian Scheuer, is a postdoctoral researcher at the Landscape Ecology Lab at Humboldt University in Berlin. And he is working with urban-human environment interactions with broader themes like natural hazard risks or benefits provided by urban green spaces. So please, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Good morning. I want to briefly introduce how we may consider citizens' trade perceptions as a means to support the governance of urban forests as nature-based solutions. And which one? Ah, that one. And I will introduce briefly a citizen science framework that we've elaborated for the project, and then show how we adapted that to several cases. And I want to start off with stating that, well, there is a wealth of evidence on the linkages between qualities of social ecological systems and, for example, human experiences or activities in these systems. And this is what is also expressed by the concept of social ecological traits that shape human affordances and that shape benefits provided by, well, green spaces, for example. And when I refer to trait here, then I mean it at a broad level. So as an aggregate or discernible feature of a U of NBS, that may be spatial aspects such as its size, it may be morphology, its composition, it may also relate to institutional or sensory aspects. And some examples, we've seen some already. Trees are said to promote momentary well-being. We know that the restorative effects of green spaces correlate with the share of grass cover or the visible amount of bushes and trees, so this speaks to the compositional aspects. We know that higher degrees of naturalness promote restoration, vitality, or reduce negative moods, and we also know about the importance of soundscape, for example, bird songs or sounds of blue features. There may, however, be quite complex interactions between these traits or trait expressions. Think about the degree of naturalness and preferences or possibly also health issues or conditions at the personal level. And therefore, we may have emerging feedback loops here that shape the compatibility of U of NBS of green spaces for users, for users, or also in regard to the benefits they provide. And some of these interactions are illustrated. Naturalness, species richness, structural diversity is all said to be really good. It promotes restoration, it promotes recreation. It's good for biodiversity, but at the personal level, it may actually cause allergenic potential, or it may be perceived as a safety hazard. We know about the social qualities of U of NBS promoting recreation, think about socialization with friends, but this may cause use conflicts, noise, displacement of nature-seeking functions, which may be undecided. And we have heard a lot about the 330-300 rule yesterday also. So we know about the importance of green spaces in near proximity to place of residence, for example. But it has also been reported that there is a certain being away component to green space use. So further distant green spaces may also have important functions. And at the personal level, you may ask, how far is too far? And it's these relationships that we sought to well, explore with our framework. We adopt traits as what we call the research team-related boundary objects. What really means is depending on the research interest in the cases, we select certain qualities that we want to explore, be it the soundscape, be it aspects of accessibility or barriers, or maybe even vegetational aspects, for example, tree cover. And we also sought to explore to a certain extent the perception of these trait expressions as something, for example, positive or negative, as something supporting uses or something that may pose barriers to specific use intentions. And this is adapted in some of our cases. In Krakow and Gelsenkirchen, Tomasz mentioned it earlier, we sought to understand U of NBS baseline conditions in terms of citizen awareness, appreciation, perception of green spaces. We had a study running in Zagreb with our colleagues from the Croatian Forest Research Institute that sought to understand different cultural ecosystem service values in different U of NBS types in the city of Zagreb. In Barcelona, we focused more on possible contributions of U of NBS to health and well-being, here specifically tied to certain environmental issues related also to air quality pollution or air quality. And in Leipzig, we adapted it to actually monitor U of NBS health itself. And I will just present some of the findings now at, well, a rough level. This is from Gelsenkirchen. here you can see we first asked about use intentions, and the functions that were, or the intentions to use green spaces at the top are walking or hiking, actually experiencing nature, dog walking and relaxation. And with respect to these use intentions, we try to elicit expectations. So what would you want to find in the green spaces you visit for this purpose? And we also asked about the positive perceptions of traits in these green spaces. And by comparing these expectations with the perceptions, we may already see certain gaps. You can see at the right that greenery was actually perceived quite positively. So these are green spaces, and that's something that's also seen by the residents. However, when you look at the naturalness, then maybe these places were not as natural as they thought them to be. We asked about negatively perceived traits. Those include mostly vandalism, for example, free-roaming dogs, so some potential use conflicts, also lacking facilities. We tried to elicit how people feel impacted with respect to their use, and, well, mostly not. It's something good. In Gelsenkirchen, it was also quite special in that they have a certain place attachment, so apparently they visit green spaces quite frequently over long periods of time. So we also asked if these green spaces, the areas they visit, if they perceive a certain change to the better or to the worse for these areas. And mostly it's a good change, but you see people have a lot of ideas what still could be done. We did something similar in Krakow, contrasting use intentions with frequently visited places and why people visit these places, also mapping negatively perceived traits again. So Thomas was mentioning that in the panel earlier. Example from Barcelona. Here we mapped perceived environmental issues such as smell, dust, noise, smoke, dirt, also traffic. And we wanted to find out if there is an impact on health at a personal level, or how severe this impact is. So if these issues cause certain health or well-being issues. And what we want to do here is we also elicited perceived amount of greenery and certain traits such as accessibility to green spaces. Here we want to see if we actually find certain associations between these perceived environmental issues, greenery at the local level, and the impacts. Finally, I know this is really small, and there's also not much time. In Leipzig, we focused more on the trees themselves. And the idea here was in the context of the droughts we had there over the last 2 years, at least. This year was not so bad, luckily. How trees are affected by these issues. And we tried to map, for example, crown dedensification, other tree damage traits. We also mapped this with respect to a tree genus to see which of these are most impacted. And to conclude, I hope you already got an idea how we may here bring together the perceptions to explore, on the one hand, relationships with users or use intentions, but also how we can identify certain pathways for action, for example, to improve conditions locally or to manage and maintain youth NBS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for showing us how we can collect meaningful data for planning and management from citizens. And may we talk a little bit later how you collected this and what kind of tools you have been developing in Clearing House for doing this, but also the different topics what can be studied with these new tools. Thank you for keeping the time so well so far for all speakers. Then we have the last presentation. We have 2 speakers here. Dennis Reutsch works at the moment as a sustainability analyst at EcoWorld Lux, and is a PhD candidate in Wageningen University, but has been working in the EFI in this clearinghouse project. And the other speaker is Dr. Jiali Jin, who is a research assistant at the Research Institute of Forestry in the Chinese Academy of Forestry in Beijing. And so, please, the floor is yours, Dennis and Jiali.
Set up my time here. Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, good to see you all. Yeah, it's nice to be here. I'll also give a presentation about public perceptions of ecosystem services and ecosystem disservices provided by forests and parks in Europe and China. Yeah, so our aim of the study was really to elicit how people perceive the forests where they most frequently go to. The benefits as well as the disbenefits. Sorry? Talk closer to the mic. Yeah. Is this how I switch also? Yes, okay, perfect. Better? Yeah, thanks. So how did we go about data collection and also designing the survey? Well, first of all, you saw my name and also Jiali's name there, but it's really a collaborative effort by many researchers, but also drawing on the expertise and experiences of the city officials that brought their expertise into the survey design. So you can see the geographic scope is quite large. In Europe, we covered 33 countries from mostly the European 27, but also the UK, Norway, Russia at the time still, and also Ukraine, as well as Turkey. In China, we focused on 18 provinces, and these are all located in the east, and basically 94% of the Chinese population live there. I think that's it. Maybe one thing that's important to mention is also that we've collected in total around 17,000 responses, around about 10,000 from Europe and 7,000 from China. Now, in terms of the results, we have this visual. On the left, you can see the data set in its entirety. And I think what sticks out is that the main dominant colors on the top are green and red. And these stand for the regulating and the cultural ecosystem services. So the one with the highest median, that scored the highest and was deemed as most important, is air quality, followed by human health and also aesthetics. So people really liking the beauty of forests and trees. Least important were provisioning ecosystem services. So let's say wild food, people using the forest to pick berries or collect mushrooms, but also timber production and firewood production. When we look at Europe versus China, I think what sticks out is that overall the Europeans love their forests just a tiny bit more, as the median values are just slightly higher compared to China. Because here it's a little bit the opposite. When we look at the general perception of ecosystem disservices, in terms, or when looking at both data sets, we can see that security issues are the dominant one. So meaning that perhaps forests, also parks, could be unsafe places. That's perceived as one of the disbenefits, most dominant one. But also health issues, so wildlife or insect bites, and very typical allergies, of course. And last but not least, also environmental issues, as these we interpret this as the spread of invasive species, and perhaps it's a bit rooted to the timing of when we conducted the survey. And overall, my last point is that between Europe and China, when you look on the right side, then you can see that the Chinese value these ecosystem disservices higher than the Europeans did. Okay, I give over to Giali. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks, Lisa. So here, I want to follow. Thank you. Sorry, that's fine. I want to follow Dennis' topic, and now I want to show a very interesting figure. We also have a topic about the landscapes. We can find from this figure, all Chinese citizens, they thought maybe the cultivate landscape will be more benefits for the urban environment and also the human beings, and also for the attractive landscape. In China, more people, they prefer the cultivate landscape better. And also in Europe, we can see for the most attractive landscape, it will be quite balanced in different groups. And but in China, we can see it is still very dominated in the cultivated landscape. So here we also have a summary to point out the key findings from our Clearing House project. Firstly, the importance of ecosystem surveys lower in China, just as Dennis mentioned before, and also both societies value forests and parks are beautiful place, and what is the perceived as most beautiful diverse, like the sustainability between Europe and China. And next, I want to show figures that we list the similarities and also the difference between China and Europe. Sorry, it is quite small because I just add this slide. So I want to point out the most important things in the red box. Here we can see regarding the perceptions and the ecosystem and the ecosystem these surveys, the most Chinese public, they focus more on these surveys. That's why recently the Chinese government also mapping these surveys of the urban trees and forest. For example, the pollen and also the fluffy catkins that's made some like negative impacts on the sensitive groups. And every year, especially in the spring, the government will collaborate with the researchers from different academic institutions and also universities to see to map the to develop a like reminder report for these kind of groups. And then we can see we have some very interesting results. For example, the female groups, they focus more, they care more about the mental health. That's the mental health benefits provided by urban forests and trees. And then for those groups that they don't have without the high education, they focus more on the ecosystem surveys that how the urban trees and forests can help to reduce the natural disaster or extreme events. And also another very important similarity is that both China and Europe, they think the most important reason they don't go to the urban parks or the urban forest, that's because it is too far away from where they live. So it is quite interesting point, and I think all the results can impact our policy things and also the decision makers. Because in China, for us, the majority group, they mostly have the similar perceptions on their beauty things, on their benefit things. So it is easy for the government to just have very simple top-down decisions for them. But in our Europe side, maybe different groups, they are quite balanced. So we have to rethink if the government need to develop different strategies for the urban forests and trees. Finally, because we are still exploring why the China and Europe has this kind of difference, maybe because the tree canopy in the different province and also different countries and cities, they are different, and they will impact the public's perceptions on the urban trees and the forest, and also the economic value, the economic conditions also will be different. Because in China, we select the most density population cities and the province. For the future update, because we are still running our MAST project in the coming 6 months, we will have more updates based on this project. Thank you. That's all about our presentation.
Thank you very much, Dennis and Giali, of sharing these key findings of this big survey in Europe and China. And yes, different local contexts and cultural situations, of course, affect on the results probably here too. But yes, I think we can start more general discussion on this topic, and I thought I could start with some questions to the speakers of their presentation. I hope you can join in with if you have something you'd like to ask from the presenters. So, about this monetary valuation going for economic values that Joe presented. So I wonder, what do you think who are the key decision makers that should know about these results, and how do you plan to communicate them?
Hello? Yes, okay. Thank you, Lisa. So I think one advantage of kind of doing it the way I did is that there are 2 different scales within the results, really. So there's the individual green space scale, and then there's also the total value. So that means that the key decision makers, or the people who might be interested in the results, are both those people around the communities around each individual green space and their local communities, and also the key decision makers and urban planners at the city scale as a whole. What was I going to say? How are we going to communicate? I think, so one advantage is that I do have the single value, which potentially makes it a bit easier to communicate. But then the problem is, how do you communicate the assumptions and what isn't included? And the results are not yet published, so for me as a researcher, that's quite an important part of the process, publishing the paper, but that could take months from now. So how do I manage that? And that would be beyond the lifetime of the project, potentially. So how do we ensure the legacy of the project after it's finished? I think makes it a bit challenging. But one thing we are doing within our REGREEN project is trying to integrate the different values, so from the economic values and from things like James's work and also Marianne's work on the deliberative valuation. We're trying to bring the different values together and then enable that to be presented so we get a bit more of a nuanced picture. So I think my approach can give you a single number, which can be helpful in communication, but again, how do we integrate all of these different things? And I don't think I really know yet how best to communicate them. But hopefully we have a route through the ULLs as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if you have a question, link directly, so please say your name, who you are, and...
Craig Simmons from Eat Solutions. We've got a standard marketplace. I was going to ask a question to Joe about the economic valuation method you chose, because obviously you didn't have time to look at that in detail, and why you chose that particular economic way of valuing the health benefits. So I wonder if you can explain a bit more about that.
So using the value of a statistical life?
The financial, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
So we chose to use the value of a statistical life, which means every life is worth the same. So that can be useful in what we're doing in a cross-country project, because it's we're not valuing anyone different potentially if we looked at Paris and then the other countries in the different countries. Again, it's kind of a straightforward approach for our first attempt at this, but I think we are missing a lot of complexity, for example, due to age of the people living nearby is not taken into account in this. But I think, yeah, the reason why we chose it was that it was a single value that could be applied, and that was the kind of with the data that we had available as well, so we could use the total mortality rate within Paris as a whole and trying to find other bits of data, so mortality rate within age and also where the people within different ages live, it was also quite challenging. So I think it's about using what we had available and taking the best available approach we could think of within a large project.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's often it's limited what kind of dose response or parameters, how you can show the impact on specific issue that restricts down the approaches you can use. But there's increasing interest in this kind of economic valuation, of course, and I guess this kind of work is now a little bit more coming up, and also in Finland we are starting to look at what kind of tools approaches we can use in measuring mental health benefits or other types of health benefits from urban green areas, a new project in that. But talking about mental health, so I'd like to jump to James and your presentation, and you started a little bit elaborating on, what these results mean and what you can, how they can help in understanding this mismatch between the residents' expectations and the actual planning and management of trees. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit more how these results can help, in identifying these key root things, or how do you see how these results can be communicated?
Yeah, sure.
Later on.
I think I'll probably refer to some of the conflict stuff more so than anything, and there's a lot of factors at play in these kind of conflicts between the planners and the citizens, and especially when you have situations like Sheffield or Plymouth in the UK as well quite recently, and it's a number of things. I think on one side you have mismanagement, but that's really that's not taking the complexity of it into account, and that's painting authorities and councils with a brush that's really not fair. You find that they're also in a very difficult position a lot of the time. I think a good example is from Dublin, where the head of the city council said he'd like to cut down all the trees because the amount of money that it would save them from people suing the council and all the litigiousness. And obviously he was saying that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it would be cheaper for them to fight the court cases with people that are in favor of trees and don't want trees removed. That would be a lot cheaper than actually meeting all the claims from people that are, falling over, or, their cars are being damaged or whatever. So there's this kind of communication issue, and there's this different valuing of the benefits versus the reality of kind of financial constraints. Sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. But when it comes to communicating these non-material benefits, such as the emotional value or the historical or cultural value or the social values of street trees or any NBS, I think the approach that we're taking in REGREEN, which Joe touched on, where you integrate all of the different values, because obviously some values do not lend themselves and will never lend themselves to a monetary value. So like we have a work package task that is on integration, and we haven't been able to present this today, but hopefully we'll have that out there within the coming months, and that will show how you can integrate these economic values and these social and non-material values. But put it in a single infographic or on a single page so that it can be interpreted and communicated to decision makers.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience now at this stage to James? I guess the research experience we have in Finland, so that often this experiential information, what we get from people, it's not valued very much in the decision making. So ecological knowledge has much more power in influencing plans, but we've been going the path that we try to bringing the information and then encourage the decision makers to take it seriously and use it. And this is often this, we have established participatory processes, but maybe the data or the information is not very well taken on board in management and planning, definitely not in planning in urban areas. But then I would like to ask Sebastian, maybe you could tell a little bit more about the tool, how you collected this data in this case studies you showed. So please.
Yeah, thank you. What we did is we of course tried to build on existing work. So we got a really nice PPGIS from colleagues from Finland, My Dynamic Forest, which was asking you to submit GP extracts actually of your activities and what you did during these activities. And we tried to adapt this to be more in line with the framework that we sort of elaborated so that we can address different interests in the cases on the one hand, and to make it a bit more accessible, because GP extracts aren't necessarily what everybody's recording all the time. So what we did is implement an application that uses geolocation of mobile devices, and we are using geofences to delineate areas of interest where we want to collect data. That could be the city level, for example, in Leipzig, or that were specific green spaces in Gelsenkirchen, a single green space in Krakow, the Strawinka River Valley. And then we basically build the surveys, testing them locally, and we came to the conclusions that they should be really short, because the overall idea was, when you think about these traits, that they can vary quite considerably spatially also. Like think about a park, it can have a totally different character on the one side and on the other end. So to capture this spatial variability, the idea was to motivate people also to submit their perceptions repeatedly, like here, there, there. And to facilitate that, the idea was to use really short surveys. And well, it's sort of worked out.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if you would assess the level of stage of implementing and taking this kind of citizen science tools on board in European cities. So what's your experience based on Clearing House case studies, where we are at the moment, and how easy it is to get this type of tools adapted in the practice? Any ideas, or how do you see it based on this work?
Reflecting on the cases in Clearing House, I would say that we have some cases, like Eugenia in the panel previously also mentioned that they have a PPGIS platform even. So I think the larger cities, they do have some infrastructure already set up where they also collect data by themselves. I also know it from Berlin, for example, which have this participation platform where sometimes it's only informatory, so there is this discussion around coming up on topic X, Y, Z. Sometimes it's about collecting comments by residents when it comes, for example, to to measurements to regulate traffic or something like that. So it's getting more towards this co-creation process. But when I think about the smaller cities, there may be nothing implemented really, I would say. When I think more about the trees themselves, there are a lot of platforms also in the cases, in many, if not all of the cases, where it's about stewardship and, for example, water this tree, plant this tree, adopt this tree, these sort of things. So driven by initiatives, there is a lot of activity, I would say, but a problem where admittedly we as projects also contribute is that it's really a fragmented space, the whole citizen science. There is an app and an app and an app, and we develop yet another app because we propose to develop yet another one, and we have another model. And this is all good because we seek to advance the state of the art, maybe. But this is something that I would say severely hinders adoption, because you cannot re-adopt new models like every 2 years or something like that. I think there is just not the capacity, and the same as with apps for citizen science, for example. And we also got this comment in a workshop in Leipzig, where they see that this work is interesting and potentially relevant for their work, but it's not that they're going to adopt yet another tool. And I think this is something that we also need to consider.
Okay, thank you. I guess this participatory tools have been there quite a while, and for example, Helsinki started participatory planning of green spaces already in 1995, and they've been elaborating that further year by year, but still it's there are many cities that do it at the minimum level, or it can be surveys, or it can be access to survey, PPGIS survey or something like that. But it really, I guess there's things to do, but Marianne, please, you have a question.
It's really inspiring to hear about your tools, because we promised an app too, and we had to abandon it because our partner was not able to develop it to the way we wanted. And it could have actually been, in hindsight, it might have been a good thing to collaborate on. So that example that you have of so many apps, I wonder how many apps actually fail and never reach the bar of actually being implemented. But even when they implement it, what is the wider adoption scale when there are too many and there might be too site-specific? So thank you for that reflection. And I have a question for Dennis Gialy and for James. For Dennis and Gialy, could you speak some more about what is the reason for the differences? Because I wonder really very much your conclusion that in China, the perception of benefits from urban forest is lower significantly than in Europe, and that disbenefits are significantly higher. What can be the reason? I know you're not finished, but to give some reflections on that, because that appears, is it the way the forests are made that could be the reason for this difference? And to James, what kind of differences in the photo elicitation workshops did you find between the Denmark, France, and Croatia? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It is really a good question, because we also try to explore the reasons why we have the difference between China and Europe, especially for the public perceptions on the ecosystem disservice. I think that's because in the past, because yesterday I also introduced the National Forestry City program in China. In the past 3 decades, the government really emphasized the importance of the trees in the cities and also around the cities. And also a lot of researchers and also the universities, they really, collaborate with the citizens to let them understand more about how the trees can provide how many benefits to our human beings, both for the physical and the mental health. But recently, in the past 3 decades, the government already implemented a lot of inner city afforestation and also some peri-urban afforestations in the cities, especially in those provinces with high GDP, because they have more fundings. And usually, the government in these provinces, they have more like willing to see more successful experience from some international cities, also for example from North American and also Europe cities. And recently, as far as our experience when we collaborate with some local groups in Beijing, they do find they have a lot of green space around their neighborhood, but they also found they also have some concerns about how the benefits can provide by trees, because they found because the climate change. So sometimes they found that tree species might not very good for their neighborhood. For example, for some very sensitive groups, they really worry about the pollen and also the fluffy catkins. So they also give some feedback to the government to ask them if they have some suggestions or if they can do some work to reduce this kind of situation. So that's why now in China, a lot of people, they really care about why this ecosystem provided by trees. When we look at the different types of these ecosystems in China and Europe, you can see in China, most people, they really care about I just mentioned the pollen and the catkins, but in Europe cities, they might care more about the falling down of the trees. Maybe they will create some other damage in the cities. So I think that's because in the past 3 decades or 2 decades, the government in China and Europe, they have different strategies in these two continents. That's why. Another thing is I also mentioned that we have really big difference between the perceptions on the most attractive landscape and also the most benefit of the landscape. I think that's because another very important point is the traditional culture in China and Europe, because in China we have a long history about the landscape architecture things. It is more about how they make the gardens more beautiful and to link to some heritage values in China. For example, you can see a lot very impressive landscape in Suzhou and Hangzhou city if you visit that kind of place. So I think that's why they think most attractive landscape is more cultivate landscape. Yeah, that's all about our thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Denise, do you want to say something on Marianne's question?
Yeah, I think Gialli already went into it quite a bit, but yeah, the heritage, but also sort of the familiarity, perhaps, that we as citizens have with forests and parks. So I think in total, when we look at the countries that we've covered, we've got some like the Netherlands or Belgium with very low forest coverage, but also perhaps the part that we covered in China, compared to maybe some more forested countries like Russia, Ukraine, also the Scandinavian countries. So, and I think there you also see some differences. For example, at Wageningen, one of the topics now is really what's really been different there is this idea of rewilding. So people seem to be so detached from forest and some nature that they're actually seeking it, and yeah, that there's more also research going into this direction, and sort of perhaps as it's maybe like a counter effect of living in these highly urbanized environments.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a really good point. I have a question linked to that. I wonder, there must have been challenges in designing this kind of survey that address really different cultural and biophysical conditions and geographic regions. And when I was looking at the illustrations, so this rewilding or the wilderness aspect was maybe quite conservative. There was not really very wild option available as a suggestion. So I wonder, what what could you say about the acceptance or the demand of this rewilding and getting more biodiversity in our urban environments based on this survey? You already discussed it a little bit, but it looks like there is, it depends on the context, quite big processes on this rewilding and really changing the management. But it seems that the attitudes are also quite stable so far. How do we change attitudes if we need to change the management regimes or create more diverse, biodiverse green spaces? So what did you learn about this biodiversity acceptance or demand for more wild green spaces?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think, yeah, I don't know, like, but platforms or also what we had embedded in Clearing House, this co-design process where we brought together societal groups, people, just citizens, also together with foresters, and also policymakers on the local level, and to exactly foster and perhaps accelerate this exchange is very important, because there seems to be at sometimes a misunderstanding or miscommunication between what the other group maybe wants. We shall maybe not forget that increasing biodiversity, having good nature is really, really important. But when we talk about forests, not urban forests, but just forests, then another aspect is also this timber production. So I think when we look at the survey results, of course we asked society, and it was very low demand, obviously, for these provisioning services like timber production. But when you ask a forester, he'd probably answer differently. So that's why I think, these like platforms, communication, that's really a key aspect that we need to, bring forward and maintain.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Gianni, or? Yeah. I have one question to you about the, go ahead, yes, please.
Sorry, I was just going to return to Mariana's question about the differences between the three countries. And I think I should preface it with saying that obviously with quite small groups that, you can't really make a very definite comparisons between the three cities, are very valid comparisons between the three cities. But I think nonetheless there was some kind of interesting observations. Firstly, we're talking about kind of European cities with fairly mild or moderate and similar climates. So you'd expect maybe much bigger differences if you looked in different regions and places with different climates. But probably the key place where people felt they valued things differently or felt they were valued themselves differently was in relation to how fast the cities were developing, or the stage of development at which the cities were at. So certainly, our groups from the inner departments of Paris, they have very strongly established architectural and landscape scenarios, and how much they can influence these at this stage, or how much they actually want them changed. They very much value them for their kind of sense of place and historical context, versus somewhere like Velika Gorica or Aarhus, which are developing really fast, and perceptions that this development is often at the expense of nature and biodiversity. So people certainly felt they're maybe a little more disillusioned about the state of the street trees, even when they were being planted as part of development. They were considered to be young, small, and pathetic trees. I don't think a tree can really be pathetic, but when they, compared them to the beautiful tree-lined alleys of the Champs-Élysées, they probably feel that, that these trees will be run over with further development, and they're easily taken out of the equation when the next phase of development comes along. So another kind of, I suppose, more interestingly, the different cities were more similar than they were different. you know, when you think about kind of disbenefits or kind of threats to well-being or health that we talked about, really nobody wanted to raise them very strongly. This might be, you know, down to desirability bias as part of a research project, but the only people who were really willing to raise these were the urban planners and the green space managers, who were more than willing and happy to bring up the points about the amount of complaints they get and the kind of the features of those complaints and where they come from. So I think it's a classic thing. If you've talked to different groups, you'll get different answers. And certainly our original plan was to speak to people in person and maybe have a wider variety of kind of socioeconomic experience and different groups within the communities. And we perhaps would have had like more diversity of observations if we had done that. But I think we had, you know, I wouldn't say homogenous groups, but definitely that's kind of the next step, is to talk to those subgroups and subpopulations within the cities. Hope that kind of answers that, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I think we have a question behind Eric.
Yeah, I have a question from the online audience, from Marie Curran from Ireland. And I'm not fully sure that I'm really understanding the question, but it's about the policy and the fact that the management of trees in cities is, how to say, dispersed between sometimes community groups, councils, private owners, and so on. So she is asking, do we need a strong policy formed from the outset of the project or even before the project is starting, so that the policy is brought along from the start and people really understand who will be in control? So I'm not sure who is the best person in the panel to answer this question.
Because she's Irish, I'll answer first.
Thank you.
So, well, I'll relate it actually to something that I read yesterday, which is quite interesting. In the UK, the UK government is proposing that developers actually become responsible for the lifetime of the trees that they plant, because there's massive issues at the moment in new developments, particularly housing developments, that the developers plant trees to meet a quota, that a fairly arbitrary quota, but they shove them in the ground and they die within a year or two because they're not the right species or it's not the right soil type. So I think this is an effort by the government to actually attribute some kind of responsibility to the developers. They're developers, money doesn't grow on trees, so how far this actually goes and whether it'll get lobbied out of existence, who knows. But I think it speaks to that question about who takes on the long-term responsibility, and that again you can bring that back to kind of historical and cultural values. And I know if you look at places like New York, they have lots of self-funded, really, or partially private-funded community groups that adopt trees in their neighborhoods, and they've been going for decades, way beyond anything that I've been able to see in Ireland or the UK. And how you develop that cultural or that social sense of responsibility without funding, I don't really know the answer to that, but I think it's really interesting how these things develop.
I was just going to talk about some of our other work on REGREEN that was carried out by our colleague Miriam Alvarado, where she looked at systems thinking and street trees and mental health. So she tried to identify the feedback loops and all the other parts of the system that affect street trees and their mental health benefits. And through that process, it was identified that tree health was really important part in enabling the mental health benefits to be realised. I guess I bring that up just really to say how important it is that management of street trees is planned for and included within policy to enable these benefits to be realised.
So here, just want to also let me rethink about some policies in China, because in China it will be more simple, because a lot of policy, they're top-down policies, and then during the different stages of the whole cycle of the implementation, of nature-based solution project, the government will encourage or involve different groups to join them. For example, the professional experts on the urban forestry, landscape ecology, urban planner, and some other related background. And then in China, so we also have another model we also mentioned yesterday. It's more about public-private partners. So usually, because the land in China, it is not like a private land. So usually the government, they have the very central land use regulation policies, and they know where you can develop the more built up area where you can have more green space. For some areas, if the government they don't have enough funding to implement the nature-based solution project, usually they will they will try to find a polling agency to open a call, and they will encourage all the private companies to bidding for this area. The government will allow the private company to make some development activities here. They can build the new buildings or house in this area, but they have to keep the neighborhood green space or create more trees around this area. So usually, for example, for the estate developers, they want to improve their the housing price there. Yeah. So they have to create more friendly environment in this area. So it is also a way for the government to make the more small scale neighborhood more green. So yeah.
Thank you. Great synergies with the environmental objectives and bringing more wide range of ecosystems to the cities. Any other reflections from the audience, please? There's a question there.
Hi, thank you. I'm Mike Hutchins from UK CEH. Main interest is in water quality, and I wondered from the public surveys whether you found any particular conclusions about riparian trees, about trees on riverbanks, for example.
The short answer is no. Well, but maybe to say a bit more, like what we did is, for example, we asked people to locate the forest or park where they most frequently go on a map. But to be fair, it appeared to be more a barrier than really a useful tool to collect good data. So in that sense, yeah, about half the locations were, I don't know, somewhere in Siberia maybe, or in the Arctic, I don't know. It's just not in the place where we expected them. So the data quality was not good. So we were not really moving forward with this. So unfortunately, not really possible to say much about this.
Okay. Maybe we go for the last round or second last round, depending how long are the answers. Because, you know, all this work you've done or we've done in these two projects, they are part of a bigger knowledge base on this area. And I would like to ask what kind of key gaps in knowledge related to this research topic you've been working with, you think what are could be the key next steps? There's a lot of to do probably, but what's your ideas? Let's say maybe 3 key things you would like to study more in the future. So please, maybe Giali starts.
Thank you. So yes, it is really. I mean, also when I present our result, I also rethink about this point. That's because now we really collected a lot of data, but you know the duration of all these two projects it is quite short to like explore more further for example, reasons, or to develop more like useful information based in such a short time. So I think when we conduct the survey here, it is quite difficult to, collect the quite uniform data format between China and Europe, especially the geographic information. So it is quite challenging. And then, because we, another thing is, if we want to find some really scientific, similarities and difference, we have to base on the same data set. So it is quite hard for us. And in the future, I think, because we found we do have different, we have a lot of difference between China and Europe, and we try to explore the reasons. But when we find out the reasons, what we can do for our next things about how to impact the policies or decision makers or the governance things and tree management things in our future work, because this is what we are really want to learn from each other. So I think for some really practical experience, for example, in China, we did a lot of forestation projects. So we improved the quality, the quantity of the urban forest in a very short time. So we really want to learn more experience about how to manage the trees from our European cities, how to make the trees have more stable ecosystem to provide benefits to our human beings and also the city environment. But we found, based on our two projects, we found for some experience it is not a ready to use outcomes. We have to adapt something based on our own background. So in our next plan, I think we need to do more about how to find out the most strategies regarding the management of the urban trees and the forest between these two continents.
Thank you. Yeah, well, maybe Joe has the mic also. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks. So when we valued the heat, we did this only in one specific way, so valuing the reduced risk of mortality for the people living nearby. But that doesn't take into account at all the people who are potentially visiting green spaces for respite from heat. So not sure how, but trying to capture that would be an interesting further research question. Also, who is currently benefiting from the cooling effect? So what's the socio-economic and potential inequalities in terms of who is benefiting from the cooling effect of green spaces? And is this evenly distributed throughout the city? Also integrating with other ecosystem services, that's linking with other REGREEN work from our colleagues, particularly at UKCEH, who are carrying out modelling of ecosystem services. And then also, we've talked about the 330-300 scenario, so can we then potentially value the benefits from heat mitigation through that scenario as well?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Cool. I think I'm certainly not the first person to say this, and I certainly don't have the solution. But at the kind of wider scale, where there's a gap and a need for more work, is the insertion or amalgamation of these non-material ecosystem service benefits with more traditional economic values, and particularly in terms of cost-benefit analyses. I know people have attempted it in the past, and it's still relatively crude, even though some of the kind of the ecosystem benefits that have more of a kind of a technical background to them, like the work that Joe's doing, is relatively sophisticated. I think there's a lack of sophistication in how we integrate the non-material benefits. And then I suppose at a personal scale or personal level, I'd like to see the photo elicitation method used for other nature-based solutions as well. And we chose street trees because most urban residents will have experience of them, whether it's their absence or presence. But some of the more kind of novel NBS that people either don't know about or are just kind of starting to come on stream in their cities, I think there'd be some really interesting conversations to be had using photo elicitation as a method.
Yeah. Thank you. Sebastian?
Well, from my perspective, I would like to add that what we implemented so far, or what we've done in the project, is indeed going towards what I may call a sort of reality check. When we reflect on the literature and we have all those traits reported and the possible benefits, then checking this against the actual perceptions may help to just question all this knowledge and to confirm it, or where we maybe need to expand on it. And that's something that I'd be really interested in doing going forward. But then again, when we think about those perceptions, then they will likely differ between groups. I mean, we've heard about the differences between perceptions of naturalness, or what is preferred between Europe and China. And I know in another project I'm working in that we have the same issues in Vietnam, for example. So they like it really manicured to a certain extent. And I think it's something. These are aspects that we need to address to how do we get this tool to be really inclusive and representative of different groups? That's something that I think needs more exploration, really.
Thank you.
For me it'd be interesting, I mean, we already cover Europe and China, but to also perhaps expand the geographical scope. I think what's nice about our survey is that we try to root this in like a classification that's widely adopted, and perhaps to see future work going into North America, also Latin America, Africa, for example, where there's even more pressing issues with climate change adaptation. That could be an interesting aspect to then compare these results. The other thing is, perhaps I pointed towards it a little bit already, is to pin our societal perceptions towards those of perhaps foresters. And then if there's a mismatch, then for me the interesting, important question to answer would be how to balance these different views. And yeah, like that's a little bit perhaps the question for me. Thanks.
Thank you for your views, how we can improve the knowledge base linked on these very complex economic and social aspects linked to nature-based solutions. And I guess we have these mainstream policies, biodiversity and climate mitigation, climate change in cities. So any ways we can plug into these ongoing policies and integrate these social, economic, health values into these policies is something worth doing, and getting more meaningful data from the users, understanding it better, and talking about the same things, that we have the same facts, shared facts for discussion, and illustrating the cases, what we are actually talking about, what kind of management, how it would look like, all these visualization tools. We could probably use them more and in a more flexible way in the future. But to me, this sounded really good. There's good work done, and we are on the right path. So I would like to thank all the speakers from your excellent contribution, and you, audience, for being here and joining with us today. So thank you very much.